cocaine got stigmatized where it used to be a medicine, and then all of a sudden it was, a Schedule I drug.
The drug war has been a failure, a complete failure.
People, like kids who went through the D.A.R.E program, were more likely to do drugs.
That certainly wouldn't surprise me,
Drug
actually.
raids.
Yeah, well, the militarization of the police, I think, sort of began in this time frame when they started building up SWAT teams. And
it seems like they're really overdoing it. Like SWAT teams for drugs. Welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Casey Rochford.
And I'm Eric Rosenblatt. And yeah.
What do you think we should discuss today?
Well, I've been thinking a lot lately about the kind of national trend towards states legalizing marijuana. And in fact, now there's bills at the federal level to do the same across the whole country. And there's actually kind of a lot of interest in it. And so I think it would be appropriate to maybe discuss the drug war. I mean, we could talk about a lot of different things, but maybe just talk about the drug war in general right now.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's been going on. Oh, you have a D.A.R.E cup.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So the war on drugs is that kind of got started with Nancy Reagan, didn't it?
No, it began quite a ways before. I think a lot of it started, if I recall, early 1900s for certain things.
Yeah, I was just talking about the coined phrase, the war on drugs. That was
the D.A.R.E program and things like that. Yeah, and I believe it was around that time.
Yeah, but definitely there has been a long-standing stigma against drugs. Some of them that just kind of popped up over time, like arbitrarily, marijuana being one of them. Cocaine got stigmatized where it used to be a medicine, and then all of a sudden it was, a Schedule I drug. And
yeah, exactly.
I don't know if the transition was quite that quick, but I don't really know the history on the schedule drug classifications where that actually began, but that'd be interesting to look at.
We probably should look at that up at some point in time. It'd be kind of interesting to see the history of that, and confirm what I've heard people say, that some of these things, particularly marijuana, banning marijuana, had some kind of racist motivation. So that would be interesting to find out if that's actually correct or not. But I think truly it's pretty evident at this point to anybody that's really paying attention to it that the drug war has been a failure, a complete failure. There's really nothing in it that I could point to as an actual success, because people are still using things even though they're illegal, and we're putting people in prison. In fact, we have probably one of the largest prison populations in the world. I think somewhere I've heard that there's like 500,000 people in prison just for drugs. Probably a great proportion of those are marijuana, which really doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into the actual qualifications for imprisoning someone based on drug use. I don't know that it's quite as dire a situation as people are making it out. Like, oh, if you get caught smoking pot, you're going to do 20 years. I really don't think it's that harsh. I think they're doing that more for dealers, the longer sentences. But I also remember a study a long time ago. The gist of it was basically like people, like kids who went through the D.A.R.E program, were more likely to do drugs.
That certainly wouldn't surprise me, actually, because you can't just tell people not to do something and have it be effective. It doesn't work like that. In fact, it works probably the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing's probably happening with sex education. Like, oh, sex is a thing? All right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and when you tell somebody not to do it, suddenly it's appealing. And people may do it to rebel or something like that. So, it doesn't have the intended effect at all.
Especially like I grew up in a Catholic school, so there was definitely a lot of rebelling that I saw a lot of my classmates go through as they aged.
I can imagine. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think the cost of the drug war also is another thing. It's been very, very, very expensive. A number I've heard is that there criminal justice expenditures across the board, not just federally, but within the states and local jurisdictions, that it totals up to about $100 billion a year spent on drug enforcement.
Wow, that's insane. That's like if they legalized everything today and taxed it all, I don't even know that they would bring in that much money.
Yeah. Well, maybe it depends. Personally, I think if, marijuana is a good start, but I don't understand why we treat alcohol addiction or addiction to eating or any other sort of thing like that as a medical condition or a mental health condition. But suddenly, if it's one of these few categories of drugs, all of a sudden, no, we don't treat it in a medical way. We treat it in a criminal way. And whether obviously, I have a feeling you're right about the personal use is not as dramatic, but nevertheless, why is it treated as a criminal thing?
Yeah.
And the tax
there
money
that options for marijuana, actually, they're just not well known. Marijuana Anonymous, or MA, is actually a thing. I dated somebody who had let's say, a very strong inclination to smoke pot a lot, and call it an addiction or what, but she participated in MA a few times, trying to break free of that cycle, and she was ultimately not successful because it is really something that is actually addicting.
Sure. Well, so are many things, though. Again, like I said, food even.
But in particular, people downplay that one. In general, a lot of people are under the assumption that it's 100% non-addictive.
Well, maybe not physically, but yeah, obviously it could be mentally.
Oh, absolutely physically.
Yeah, you think so?
It affects dopamine receptors, and so anything that does that, in varying degrees, of course, will have an addictive quality to it.
So coffee as well.
Coffee as well, cigarettes, sex, but you get into the stronger stuff that, like, marijuana is, somewhere between a cigarette and cocaine, but it's definitely more addictive because it's affecting dopamine a lot more. If you're using it daily and you're like, I could stop any day, I mean, yes, you probably could with some willpower, a little easier than meth,
Yeah,
but,
that might be true.
But there is definitely a physiological connection that is made between feeling good and using the drug. And addiction is very possible.
That's true. Now, why don't we talk a little bit about the policing side of things?
Yeah.
The effects of that, because it does. It's obvious that it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of people in jail at great expense. We have to pay for that.
Yeah.
But there's other side effects of this drug war
drug raids.
Yeah, well, the militarization of the police, I think, sort of began in this time frame when they started building up SWAT teams, and they have all kinds of crazy equipment, MRAPs and everything. It's all, now it's about terrorism. Of course, that's where some of that stuff's coming from. But it was definitely a heavy militarization, and a completely different change in attitude of the police. Which, oh yeah, also there's consequences like the civil asset forfeiture, which is absolutely tied
I'm
into
not
the drug
actually
war.
familiar with that. Could you give me like a brief synopsis of
Yeah,
what goes on there?
sure. So the way it works is, let's say you're driving along. Maybe you take some money out of the bank, right? This is a classic example that has actually happened many times. You take some money out of the bank because you're going to buy a car from somebody on Craigslist, right? They say, okay, this car is $12,000. You know, just come and buy it. You get $12,000 cash. You have it in your car. You're driving to go meet somebody. Cops pull you over for burned out tail light or whatever, and they see that money there, or maybe they, for whatever reason, decide that they need to inspect your car. Maybe there's some probable cause or something, and they find that money. They can just take it, because the assumption is if you have that much money, you must be a drug dealer or a drug user. And they can take it, and there's really not much you could do about it. You could try to get it back, but you may not. And they seize all manner of things. Also, if there's, say, another situation where maybe you do have a quantity of some illicit drug in your house or something, or maybe you are a dealer, and you get raided. Well, anything of value that you have could be seized. It could be your house, it could be a boat, it could be a car, it could be computers, just anything really. Like
They just arbitrarily take something, whether or not it might have anything to do with the crime in question.
yep, yeah, because they just say, well, it's probably because this is drug money that you bought it with. You know, that's how you got these things.
Yeah, that's pretty darn ridiculous.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of cases too, without any actual evidence, merely just having a substantial quantity of cash on you can constitute a seizure like that. They don't find any drugs. You just happen to have a bunch of cash, and so they say, oh, it has to be drugs, and they'll take it. And that's a product of the drug war, and I think that it's very harmful to society.
Yeah, that is a really interesting topic. We should dive into that more when we discuss the abuses of power the that come with the police department. I think that would be a really interesting topic to go over.
Oh yeah, we should certainly put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
The thing is, I think, personally, I think that people should be able to use whatever they want, even if it's harmful, because it's your body, and you should be able to decide what goes into it, and how you use your body. Well, obviously, there's some people who believe otherwise, but this is a case of prohibition failing, not the proof that it doesn't work. It's the same thing with the alcohol prohibition in the 30s. It was a complete failure, and it created gangs.
Yeah, the only positive thing that came out of it was health related. I wrote down this source, and then I accidentally threw it away. I'd probably dig it out of the trash maybe later, but there was a whole paper written on this, and it actually detailed how the amount of alcohol consumption definitely decreased, because there's a lot of people that will just say, oh, well, it's illegal, I'm not going to do it. But that effect was still in play long after the end of Prohibition. It lasted until the 1970s, actually.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, like people were basically just like, well, made it fine without drinking. I guess I don't, because they just keep on keeping on, you know, like
Yeah.
whatever the reason was, they just didn't drink that much. And then culture started to change, and you know, now we're back up there, right
Yeah.
around the levels that we were before Prohibition.
Hmm.
But yeah, there was definitely still drinking going on. There was definitely still alcohol being produced because
Oh, yeah.
because you know, there was a big hit to the economy. Like all the breweries were gone, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
They were all shut down, and they all thought. I was reading in this paper. They all thought, oh, beer is such a low alcohol content, especially back then.
Mm-hmm.
We're not gonna be affected by this prohibition. Oh, yep, they were.
Huh.
Lots of people lost their
That's,
jobs.
well, and there's a whole system in there, not just the breweries, but the distribution and the stores that sell it and all that.
Farmers.
Bars, all the bars and everything. Um, yeah, the thing is that sort of effect where you improve the general well-being of people, that people drink less, that could be achieved without all of the drama that came with the Prohibition era. Education, there's many different ways. It doesn't necessarily take the force of arms to change people's minds in that regard, or rather, it shouldn't.
Yeah. It's strange though that that effect was seen with alcohol, but I believe the exact opposite is going on with drugs. You know, drugs as in like other than alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I mentioned earlier, like the D.A.R.E program kind of pushed people into using more. Um, whether or not that was a real thing, but
It could be, yeah.
yeah, like I don't know that there's anything showing that the war on drugs created a decline in use. I'd be inclined to
No,
think no.
no, because simply making something illegal doesn't change the demand for something that people want, whatever it might be. You know, there's many things that we could probably discuss in that regard. Prostitution is one of those that
Mhm.
there's a demand for, and regardless of the law, people are going to do it. And the thing is, in the case of drug prohibition and the drug war, it all it does is make things less safe and unknown. You don't necessarily know what it is that you're buying because there's no standards. It also creates an underground economy that's completely free of taxation and regulation. You know, it's not transparent to the public at all,
Right.
and also it creates, because of the scarcity and the lucrative nature of things like that, it also creates violence. That violence is a product of that sort of competition. It's not just like one business competing with another across the street, and their means of competing is just better ads or a flashier sign. No, they people kill each other.
Yeah, and it's also wasting a lot of time for law enforcement. They really are spending precious hours trying to bust drug deals where they could be, you know, responding to actual violent crimes, or you know.
Sure, absolutely.
And I mean, I have a problem with a lot of time wasting things that the police do, but that's another topic. But this in particular is absolutely ridiculous because, as I alluded to earlier, like drug raids are highly dangerous. People, innocent people, get killed when they bust into the neighbor's house instead of the one that they were supposed to, and they
Yeah.
just start shooting and they kill people, and oh, whoops, and they get away with it.
Oh, you know, in fact, just recently I was reading an article about I wish I had it in front of me. Um, but there was a couple living in a house or something, and the police had some sort of tip that they were dealing heroin or something like that, and they got a no-knock warrant, and basically late at night, I think it was, or early in the morning, as is usually the case, they just busted in the door, plain clothes too, at least from what, if I recall. They were in plain clothes. They just busted in the door in the middle of the night, didn't alert anybody as to who they were or what they were doing there. And of course, the couple that was there, they freaked out. They thought, oh my God, this is a home invasion. And they started shooting. And I think one cop was shot, or several were shot, and I think one died. So the cops returned fire and killed both of these people. And it turns out after they did a search of the place, they found nothing. There was no heroin at all.
Of course.
And this happens all the time. You know, you get the wrong, people bust into the wrong house and they get the dog shot just because.
Yep. Yeah, that just happened recently.
This doesn't happen with other sorts of encounters with the police for other sorts of things. That at least it didn't used to. I think it's been driven up by this war on drugs. This sort of military action aspect of it. SWAT teams and things like that, and it doesn't do us any good.
It seems like they're really overdoing it. You know, like SWAT teams for drugs.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't like inherently violent crimes, if you will. Like there's certainly some violence that can be associated with it just because of the nature, but it's a ridiculous overkill to come in with guns blazing.
Absolutely.
And you kind of get what you deserve there. Like I've got no sympathy for what happened there.
And it's a tragedy that it did happen. And
I mean, I have sympathy for the couple that was innocent and died, but like as far as the police doing what they did, that was just stupid, you know.
Sure, and I'm sure just there was kind of a probably a level of impatience to get the bad guys basically, and they didn't spend any time doing any proper research to verify. It's just there's this kind of craze to get as many of these people as you possibly can.
And then you end up with corruption issues where there's planting of drugs in order to get people.
Yes.
You know, like it's just ridiculous. When you think about it, this is, like you make a good point. Like people probably should have the choice to do whatever substance they please, given that I think there should be like some pretty heavy like proper education about the effects of it. Like D.A.R.E was more like don't do this rather than like telling you what those drugs actually do.
D.A.R.E was definitely more of a fear-mongering sort of thing, like a lot of sex ed has been.
Fear-mongering doesn't work. I mean, like terrorism, like everyone's deathly afraid of that word and it gets stamped on everything. And it's basically just a fear tactic to do whatever. But
yeah, exactly. And people believe that if they just make it sound bad, that people are just going to avoid it. Well, no, it actually makes it more enticing to certain people. The thing is, I think it would be more beneficial if we just simply made everything legal with a tax, like we do with many other drugs out there. And if there's a tax, the tax money then should go towards treatment.
Yeah. Now the thing about that is, we live here in Washington and we have statewide legal marijuana. It's a great fuzzy area on the federal level still, but and how they interact. But the point is the taxes that are coming in from marijuana, which are quite substantial, portion of that is supposed to go to treatment, I think, and it's not.
Well, I think in this case, I don't think that marijuana is as much a scourge as certain other things, as far as its effect on a person's life or their health. Maybe certain people in certain situations, but if everything were legal, certainly you would want to fund treatment for heroin addiction and meth addiction, and I mean anything, opiates in general. those are the sorts of things that money should be going to. There's a lot of things like hallucinogens, those aren't really a threat. And another thing, here's another negative impact of the things being scheduled that way, classified as they are, is that there's really no room for research, for medical research. And there's some promising, before some of these things were banned, there was some very promising results in research, and that all got cut off.
That's partially true. There is research being done on these things,
but it's very limited, though.
Yeah, like it's definitely harder to get the quantities that they need for like a robust study, but they're allotted enough to get like at least a general idea of effectiveness and stuff like that. And a lot of people take that and run with it. And really, like we do need more robust studies. I would say that regarding like the medical use of marijuana, and we could do like a whole show on this, but I'd say that the only like substantial evidence that might be out there for a medical use is for epilepsy, and it makes sense because epilepsy is an overactivity of your electricity in your brain, basically, and marijuana is a nervous system depressant, so it makes sense that would stem off seizures.
Sure. But, well, and there may be things that we haven't yet discovered yet because the limited amount of research that can be done.
Yeah.
I think well, and there's situations, there's some examples of different countries legalizing or decriminalizing everything. Like Portugal would be one. There's some other countries that have done it, and the effect isn't what people would have you believe it is. That oh, everyone's going to be running through the streets completely just spaced out of their mind and high and just drugged up. It doesn't happen that way.
Slippery slope fallacy.
Well, and they said that in Washington about marijuana legalization. You know, I remember all those ads and everything about how once it's legal, there's just going to be kids getting a hold of it or something. Of course, it's always the kids that are used as the wedge to state that case.
Actually, I think Colorado legalized around the same time, and I think I saw a study where there was actually an increase of children being hospitalized for marijuana toxicity.
Well, like, and that may be a temporary thing too. I mean, obviously, it's fairly new, so we don't know if this is the effect of sort of the party time effect.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, they were under the impression that legalizing it and having it restricted to age 21 and up would somehow prevent children from getting their hands on it as easily.
Well, of course not. In fact, you could look at the example of alcohol or tobacco that
exactly
you can get those things anyway. I mean, even if marijuana was still illegal, kids could still get a hold of it. Maybe it's not as prevalent, but certainly they could still get a hold of it. And then what are they getting?
It's probably easier, to be honest, because you know the way kids often would get beer, just standing outside a store that sells beer and finding a lackey who's willing to go in and buy them beer. And you couldn't really do that if you had to like be in the know of like who was a dealer and who wasn't, because it was all shifty, shady, back alley stuff. And you know, maybe it is a little easier for kids to get a hold of it now, but like,
well, the thing is, okay, maybe it does happen, but is it really the scourge that we were told it was going to be? It was like the way the ads and the way politicians and various individuals who were against it were talking was like it was going to be an apocalypse.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
clearly it's not.
Yeah, it's not as dire as that. I mean, there are developmental obstructions that can come from drug use at a young age, like your brain doesn't stop developing until you're 25. Actually, like I would kind of think it would make more sense to have the legal age be 25 for things like alcohol and marijuana that actually strongly affect your brain development.
Maybe. Well, certainly at least public education. I mean, educating the public, that is, would help if it were honest instead of the past drug education that we had. We actually were honest with people and explained things. Maybe people could make a better decision about their usage of these things. Plus, if it were just legal, there wouldn't be a rebellious nature to using it.
Right.
So that might be a benefit there too. I think it's a very complex topic that we couldn't possibly fit into a short analysis. Maybe we should get some more information and analyze that.
That's how all our episodes go, isn't it?
Pretty much. Yeah, that's true. We kind of bite off more than we could chew in some cases.
Yeah. We couldn't possibly record for 24 hours straight, or could we? Challenge.
We could try that. Yeah. Oh, well.
That's probably about all the time we've got for this particular topic at this moment.
I think so. That's a good point to conclude, I think. So if anybody has questions or comments, feel free to leave them and keep the conversation going. Thanks for deep sink diving with us. And check out the music on your way out.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.